Now that we've looked at a number of different pests and we've talked about how to identify and distinguish various insects that we might come across inside of our growing environment, I want to look at prey-predator relationships, and this will start to shed some light on why greenhouse pest problems can spiral out of control so quickly, and why integrated pest management plans are not intended to be responsive action to a pest outbreak, but rather should be established and maintained as a preventative strategy to mitigate pest outbreaks in your growing environment. So we're going to talk about integrated pest management reaction times, and we're going to look at a 1-week window and what happens over 7 days from the time that we find pests in our growing environment. And for this example, we're going to use growth rates of aphids. So on day 1, we go into our growing environment, we start surveying our plants for pests, and we find a basil plant, we flip the leaves over, and we find about 35 aphids on the underside of the leaves of our basil plant. Within 3 days, that population of 35 aphids will double to about 70 aphids. By day 7, the population of aphids will climb to about 187 aphids. So in 1 week, the population of aphids can easily grow from a manageable problem to a localized infestation. So if we try to use beneficial insects as a response to this aphid outbreak, and we say, wow, okay, I found 35 aphids on my basil plant, I really need to get some beneficials in here to take care of this problem, you can identify your aphids on the first day. By the 3rd day, you probably have your beneficials ordered and they're being shipped to you. And they probably won't arrive until day 7. So in the time that you saw your aphids, ordered your beneficials, and have your beneficials on hand in your greenhouse, that week could have passed and your population of aphids is rapidly growing. And this is why we don't use beneficial insects as a response to pest problems, but rather we structure and implement an integrated pest management plan as a preventative measure against pest outbreaks. Another problem that arises from spontaneously buying in beneficials when you have pest problems is this interesting dynamic of prey-predator relationships and the loss of your beneficial population over time. So here we see population curves of the pests in your greenhouse and the beneficials that you're bringing into your greenhouse. So on day 1, we find a relatively small population of aphids. On day 7, we introduce beneficials. So out of nowhere, our beneficial population spikes because we had none and we bought them in and we introduced them into our population. As your beneficials are getting acclimated to the greenhouse, your pest population is still going to rise for a little while until your beneficial population has grown to a degree that they're able to appropriately combat the population of pests in your greenhouse. And this is going to be a normal growth curve of prey-predator populations. So at some point, your predator population, your beneficial insects, will start to knock down the pest problem. There's no way to know exactly how much crop loss you've experienced in this window, but at some point, your beneficial insects will start to reduce the population of pests in the growing environment. Unfortunately, they will continue to reduce the population of pests in the growing environment to the point that they run themselves out of food, and eventually your beneficial population will drop off and you will lose the beneficials that you purchased and brought into your growing environment. This also sheds some light on why we don't utilize beneficials as a ad hoc treatment or response to pest problems in our growing environments. But it also sheds light on the need to intentionally cultivate populations of beneficial insects in your growing environment, and a need to have alternative feed sources for your beneficial insects should the population of pests drop to a level that they can't support your beneficials. So in the next lecture, we're going to look at banker plants and sap plants and pollen plants, and we're going to talk about how we can utilize different plants in our growing environment to supply secondary food sources to our beneficials so that if there are no pests in the greenhouse environment, they still have a food source on which to grow and reproduce, so that when an aphid arrives in your greenhouse or when a whitefly arrives in your greenhouse, you have a stable population of beneficials already cultivated in your greenhouse, and they can directly go and address those incoming pests before their population has a chance to really take off and become an infestation or a serious pest problem that causes crop loss.